Welcome to On the Soul's Terms podcast, a weaving of astrology, Greek mythology, and depth psychology. I'm Chris Skidmore, an astrologer, psychotherapist, and craniosacral therapist living in Ubud, Bali. Welcome to On the Soul's Terms podcast, and today I'm joined by a guest, Brice Hancock, who is the executive director for Mile High Sober Living and an active member of Denver's sober community. Let me just read to you from Brice's bio here. Brice believes that life is about things to do and people to do them with. He's regularly exercises, he goes to the gym, he plays guitar, likes music, art, spirituality, constant self-improvement, and spending time with his son. In a previous life, he owned a live music bar and was surrounded by active alcoholism and addiction, and now is surrounded by recovery. He's a realtor and the president of a 501c3 non-profit called Musicians Recovery Project, which raises money for treatment for those with limited resources in early recovery. Today, Brice and we talked about addiction in its many forms, especially about his own journey from the pits of despair that it took him to in his process, his way back, and then what life looks like now. I hope you enjoy our conversation today. All right, welcome to On the Soul's Terms podcast, and we have Brice Hancock joining us today. Brice, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Just really interested to get you to introduce yourself to the audience and give me a sense of who you are. And, you know, today we'll be talking about addiction and addictive processes, and maybe you can just launch into the deep end here and tell us about your story and how you got here.
Okay, sure. So I am Brice Hancock, CEO of Mile High Recovery Center in Denver, Colorado. Mm-hmm. I am a person in long-term recovery, which is just a different way of saying that I haven't done drugs or alcohol for a really long time. And yet I still do identify as an alcoholic and an addict. I grew up in a middle-class family, and it was all my needs were met, except for my emotional needs. There was not a lot of hugs and I was not allowed to feel big emotions. I felt very abandoned. There was a lot of go away, kind of leave us alone. My father worked constantly, and my mother, who was also, she was raised in an alcoholic home and, did her best, but it was not conducive to my emotional health. And so I felt just scared of the world, low self-esteem, a lot of doubt, a lot of worry, and a real inability to connect with other people. And so when I discovered alcohol, I realized that when I was drinking, all that went away. All of a sudden I could connect with people. I had this new, found courage and strength. And when I moved out of the house at 18, I became a daily blackout drunk. And I went to college and things were fine because you can kind of be that guy at college. You're chasing girls, you're drinking a lot of beer, you're doing a little drugs, so it's not that bad. And then when I graduated college and most of my friends transitioned to regular life and got, careers and families, I'm a musician and I wanted to play music. And so I went to Baltimore, Maryland, which is a rough city, and played music, caught a creative spark with some people, and it was awesome. But we crashed and burned, as young men in that arena tend to do. And within a very short time after that ended, I found myself addicted to heroin and crack and running the streets of Baltimore.
Wow.
And when you're on certain drugs, it gets real weird real fast. And so I burned my life to the ground there, and I moved back home to my parents at the age of about 26 and kind of kickstarted my music career and was able to dial back my drug use and just drink for the most part. And so I was drinking and playing music and booking bands and booking my own band. And I found that I was pretty good at booking bands. So I became a booking agent, which was great for me, but terrible for my addictive nature.
Mm.
And at one point, I was booking a club, and I was booking national blues tours. And I did so well at the club that a bigger club picked me up. And so I went and booked the biggest club in Denver. And then the guy at the original club said, I got to get out of this industry. Would you like to buy this bar?
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah. And I said, yeah, sure, but I don't have any money. And he said, I'll carry the loan for you, which really means here's a bar.
Wow.
So I own a music club, which sounds great. And I didn't think that my drinking could get any worse, and it got much, much worse. So after 7 years of doing that, I was in and out of the doctor. I was drinking about a half gallon of vodka a day. I was doing weird things like hiding. I was going to the liquor store and hiding booze in my bar, around the bar. I would sit at the bar with an O'Doul's and with vodka in it, just outlandish alcoholic behavior. And I was in and out of the doctor at the time. I was completely dehydrated, was experiencing seizures. I was completely physically dependent on alcohol. And he did a blood test, and he said, you are a late stage alcoholic. Your liver is cirrhotic. Your pancreas is stressed, and I'm surprised your heart hasn't stopped.
Wow.
I give you a year to live if you can't stop drinking. And I could not stop drinking. I drank for well over a year. I knew I was dying, but every day it was like, well, I'm not going to die today.
Mm.
And then eventually I started going to AA meetings. I reached out for help because I knew I couldn't do it on my own. At least I knew that. Like, for people that are like that addicted, willpower just won't work anymore.
Mm.
So I started going to AA, and I put together like 90 days sober. And the odd thing is that I felt worse.
Right.
I'm just prone to depression and anxiety, and I didn't like anything, and I didn't like anybody, and I couldn't stop judging everybody in there. And I had this real strong opinion. Like I hated myself, but I thought I was better than everybody there. And so about 90 days in, I started to relapse, and I was just in and out of the rooms, just doing that thing. And one day I just was upset, and I looked at the steps on the wall. I was not doing any work. I was just going there and acting like a jerk. And I said, this is stupid. Someone explain these steps to me, and maybe I'll do it. And this old lady yelled at me, and my problem was besides the fact that I hadn't surrendered my judgment and my will, I would relate to people when they shared, and as soon as they mentioned the word God, I would disregard everything else they had to say because I didn't believe in any kind of God or higher power.
Right.
And so I just relapsed, and I just recommitted to being an alcoholic. But I had seen the other side. I had seen people that were sober, who drank the way I drank, who did drugs the way I did, and who were now happy in their life. And I had this like nervous breakdown.
Mm.
I was at my bar in my office, which was also the liquor closet, surrounded by liquor bottles, drunk. And I called a friend of mine, and I asked him if he had a gun because I wanted to kill myself. And he said, no, well, I'm not going to give you a gun, first of all. And then he and my wife at the time, my ex-wife, convinced me. They took me to a psych hospital. So I ended up in a psych hospital for a week. And while I was in that psych hospital, I had just different experiences, and had a choice to make. Do I want to be a mental patient, or do I want to admit that I'm powerless over alcohol and drugs? Mm. So I got out of there. I got my ass right back to AA, to a meeting, and I sat and I listened, and I stopped judging. And it was almost like I didn't trust my own thinking for the first time in my life. And I listened to what they had to say. And when they said, get a sponsor, I got a sponsor. And when they said, work the steps, I worked the steps. And so I've been sober ever since.
Wow.
And that's kind of the story of how I got sober.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things I want to pick up on. Obviously, there's we're in chapter 1 here of, the story, and I mean, I'm fascinated in your the music and the creative spark. You said something that things got real weird real fast. I think that's what you said. I'm actually really curious into what weirdness was around and what kind of worlds were opening up as well.
Sure. So in the inner city of Baltimore, there are neighborhoods where there are no resources and you are either a drug addict or a drug dealer. And that's where, back then we didn't have any internet. There were no cell phones. And so you had to go to the bad neighborhood to find drugs. And there's just this whole crazy, seedy underworld of people who have basically given up on life. And they're just going through the motions and they're just kind of taking advantage of each other. And I saw a lot of things that normal people aren't supposed to see. And it's not where I'm supposed to be. God didn't put me here to be in these kinds of places, right? And so that's how it got real weird real fast. And what happens with certain drugs like opiates or heroin is that it takes over your life. At first, it's like a cool addition, and then after a while, it takes over, and then it replaced me. I judged all my time by how much money I had. Would I have enough money to get more drugs, to get well, just to function?
Wow. So it sounds like if we go all the way back, there's this, you've mentioned that in your family of origin that you had what you needed resources wise, but not what you needed emotionally at all, as far as no real connection. And so that feeling of being sort of, maybe I get the sense of being isolated or alone or not really related to, or just kind of shut off or cut off. It's like, I did a little episode a little while ago about the handless maiden, who has her hands cut off. So the whole feeling function is gone and you just you don't feel, you kind of can't feel, because feeling is also not just a personal thing, but a collective thing, right? Like to feel, you have to have feelers around you. And there was something of the family unit that you were in, which I think is kind of something in the world right now as well. There's a cultural piece to that, the family being a sort of a little unit of the culture. And I think many people can relate to this experience of growing up, maybe yourself being musical and being obviously entrepreneurial and having these sparks, as you say, of creativity, having within your own soul a lot of the water function or the music and the feeling in your world, but being not able to express that. And I guess right there from the beginning, there's this sense of all of that feeling being locked away in parts of your body, maybe parts of your psyche, everything being kind of closed and shut down. And I wonder if it's the alcohol and the opiates, because it's interesting to be drawn to that. You did say crack as well, I suppose, which is a little different. A little bit of everything. Yeah. But drawn to ways to open up those. It seems like the first thing, and as you say, like there's an element when you're first doing it, which it must be for everybody that goes down this path, where it gives you something, right? Like it gives you some kind of freedom or something. What did it give you when you first started doing these things?
I think now knowing what I know now and like understanding like complex PTSD, which is kind of what I had. And there was like a real conditional love in my family of origin, which is kind of odd in a way, because even if I fulfilled the conditions, I was never really rewarded with love. So I had to learn to like self-soothe. I became very dependent on my own ability to solve my problems, but I was filled with emotional pain and intense just doubt and fear and worry. And when I would take drugs, that would go away. Like all the voices in my head would just be quiet, And so alcohol and drugs, they numb emotional pain. And then what happened is one day they turned on me. I could not kickstart the party. It was not numbing my emotional pain. And it had taken over to the point where I could not stop.
Yeah, right.
I'd lost the power of choice. And that was just my experience, So and that's really all I could talk about is my experience. I don't know why certain people become addicted and some people and certain people don't, because I have a brother. We grew up in the same family.
Right.
He didn't end up a late stage alcoholic.
Yeah.
So that was my path. But I was creative. I did love music. It was a real great escape for me. And it gave me some sense of self-esteem because it's fun to be good at something, right?
Yeah, of course.
It feels good to be good at something. And it was a great way to bond with, other people and just sort of be adored, even though I didn't really feel great about myself. And it's still, the creative process is still something that I enjoy. So yeah, I just, like what happened is I started drinking and it was fun. And then it became such a just central part of my life. And then it turned on me one day and
Right.
I was left with this huge problem. And the funny thing is, like, drinking was not my problem. It seemed like my problem. It was my solution to my problems. And it was really heartbreaking when it stopped working.
Yeah. And I like the word solution because it's coming from that root of like solvent or dissolving. And so you were dissolving your problems, but you also dissolved something kind of essential. You also started to dissolve yourself, didn't you?
Well, you lose yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so while it's dissolving that inner critic and those voices and all the inner hate and all of the, self-loathing and all of that, briefly, I guess, it just goes away briefly and you get to experience yourself as maybe free for a fleeting moment, for just a moment of like, oh, I'm free of that. And then when they come back, when you're sober in the morning and you feel like shit and your head is pounding and things are not good and you know it, that's when I guess they come back in, those demons, and they're louder than ever, but then you dissolve them away again. And I guess the more that you're doing that process, you're dissolving something else as well as the demons, aren't you? You're dissolving something because, it's interesting to hear you say, and I think this is something I really want to zoom in on a little bit, where when you first went to the meetings, you hated yourself, but you judged everybody else in there and the whole process and the whole program. That's so you were better than everybody else, but you hated yourself.
Yeah.
It's
a weird kind of self-esteem, right?
It is a weird kind of like, what's happening there? Because this is the thing that this is where like part of where the juice is for me of like, how do we feel both superior and deeply inferior at the same time?
I believe it's like a defense mechanism, which maybe works in a way, but it really also it will kill you. Like, the disease of addiction wants us to isolate. It wants us to not connect with other people so that it can kill us. That's just how I look at it. And that was also the work of surrendering to a process, to be involved in a program. And, a lot of people think that AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, is just about not drinking, and that's not true. It's a way to lead me to a power greater than myself that will solve all my problems, right? That's what the process of the step work does. And, when people that go, you meet these people that are so spiritual and you just know God loves them. And it's not about drinking. I'm 11 years in. I have a fairly reasonable expectation I'm not going to drink today, but I still go because I connect with other people. It makes me feel good. And I hear God in those rooms when people speak. I hear, I connect with them in a deeper way.
And so tell me about that, because when you hear God, tell me about your unique, subjective, individual experience of that. I'm super curious.
Well, the great thing about AA is they tell you straight up, you can choose your own higher power. It can be whatever you want. It can be the universe. It can be source. It can be God. Some people are Christian. It's like some people will find yoga or meditation or anything kind of spiritual, right? And it'll change their life, right? And then that's their way in. AA was my way in. And I had a bunch of spiritual experiences throughout the years of being sober and surrendering more and more of what I think I know. And it's spiritual growth, and it's just kind of like it's the center of my life these days.
Yeah. And I understand, when I hear people talk about AA and the God component to it, it's almost like there's a natural defense that comes in, like defending that, it's not this God or it's not that God, this kind of thing. But I'm curious just to be where I come from. I mean, I just see, that the world is animate. It's not a dead thing. And that to me is enough. So that's what's led me in my journey from being raised Catholic and then having some kind of crises around that particular God quite early in my life. And that set me on a quest to be like, well, what is real as far as that invisible world? And that's actually led me into pre-Christian traditions, like the polytheistic traditions of Greek mythology and these kinds of places where I find a rich imagination at play, which has been personally my healing component around that. So to me, I'm not, I've never really, I went through the atheist thing for a little while, but to me, there was always something like the need to relate to something beyond the self is essential in anybody's life, because then if we don't have that, we have the ego, we have the hero, and we just have heroic consciousness. And I can hear you in heroic consciousness early in your life, just charging through like, now I'm going to, like, here's the opportunities and I'm going to make the most of them. But ultimately you're completely consumed by your own ego, right? That's why when you walk into the room, you're like, nah, these guys are all
these guys, I don't trust you people. You're too happy.
You're too happy. This is obviously bullshit. Look at this stuff on the wall. Look at this person.
Happy you're lying.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So some way along the line, you've had to take the ego off, and because it's killing you, like it's consuming you. Which is to me, mythically the heroic consciousness. It's the dark side of the hero that is like, Hercules puts on this big lion's pelt and now it's him against the world, and that kills him too. He also gets consumed. He gets consumed by his own armor, which is an interesting sort of metaphor, isn't it? That his own armor attaches to him and eats him from the inside. It's a gruesome image, but it's a good one for, if we're going to continue along the path of ego, that's where it'll end up if it's not there already.
Yeah. For me, it was just a process. It was like I was all ego, and I just believed that I could fight this thing on my own. Like I would say, I'm fighting this disease and I'm going to win. And every day I'd end up drunk. And then, they would say, you need to surrender. And when I ended up in that psych hospital, there was just this series of things that happened, like small spiritual experiences. And I realized that I was not the first one to go through this.
Yeah.
I wasn't the first one to be in this spot. And then it was like this real victim-y feeling, like, well, why does this keep happening to me? And then it's like, oh, alcohol. Alcohol and my own willpower. Like the harder I tried, the worse things got. And so I just had it beaten out of me. I had myself beaten out of myself in a way. And like I said, I didn't trust my own thinking. And when I went back to meetings, I had a different experience because I stopped judging everybody and I started listening to them because they're trying to help me.
How did that happen, Brice? How did you make that? Because it's like, that's so, like opposite to what you were there before. Is it just hitting that like psych ward rock bottom for you? Or what? How did that switch happen?
It was a humbling experience to be in there, and they take your belt and they take your shoes because they're afraid you're going to kill yourself, and they take your cell phone. Oh my God. Wow. And they strip searched me, and they checked on me every 15 minutes to make sure I was okay. And they gave me this medication, and they diagnosed me bipolar 1 with rapid cycling and post-traumatic stress disorder from early childhood trauma. Jesus. And part of me was glad. I was happy for that diagnosis because it explained how I felt when I didn't drink.
Huh.
But when I got out and I didn't trust myself, I went back to AA and I got something that some people will call grace, which is I didn't deserve it, but I got a power in my life that would work if I stayed out of the way of my own life. I was in the way of my own life. And it was small things, right? It wasn't all at once. I remember one specific experience. I had this business partner. I was newly sober and I was angry and I believed he was stealing money from me. And I was in a meeting and I was thinking, I was not paying attention to the meeting and I wasn't sharing. I was thinking about all the things I was going to do to this guy and say to this guy, because how dare he steal from me? I'm doing all this stuff and it's the monkey mind, right? And the voice is just going. I'm on a ride. And the meeting ends and I drive back to my house and I come up the stairs and I sit down at my desk and the noise in my head is deafening. And I look at my computer monitor, which was turned off, and I see my reflection and I hear the voice and I look at myself and I say, shut up. And all of a sudden I'm like, who are you telling to shut up? Who's saying all this stuff in your head? And there was like this separation of like, it was my ego doing all that stuff. And I had this moment of separation from my ego. And it was a real aha moment for me, right? Like to be able to like identify that thing is going and it's not me. And so it was small things like that. And
which to me, it sounds to me like it's taking a different angle, because I'm always trying to look at different angles, but it sounds like a possession. It sounds like something, because when I'm listening to you, I hear a wrestle between the heroic one on the one hand and this force that it thinks that it's bigger than, the hero thinks is bigger and better than and can overcome this, but clearly every time it goes to war with it, it gets defeated by it. And then something comes over you because this is, you're in that meeting, you're as from the shamanic traditions, we would say that's a possession of some kind. Something has you, and maybe it is you, maybe it's not you, maybe it's God, maybe it's the demon, maybe, I don't know what it is. It's hard to state exactly what it is, but you do have the experience of, you said monkey mind, but it's like something overwhelms your consciousness, right? And takes over. Because it reaches for the bottle where you don't want to reach for the bottle. You're like, I'm not going to drink today. I'm stronger than this. That's will. That's your willpower. And yet next thing you know, you are drunk that day, later that day, right? Yeah. Like you are back in that place. And so this thing that seems to have it in for you is stronger than you and takes over you. It takes over your body. It takes over your senses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I just look at it as my ego. Like it's angry, it's threatened, it is creating this story that I've been robbed from when I probably hadn't been, and it wants to keep me separated from other people. It wants to keep me isolated.
So it runs a narrative that maybe it starts to get into that paranoia or this people are out to get me, and then starts playing that into the world as well. So creating more of the isolation. It's very crafty, this thing. It's quite an intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of grows back, like if I'm not careful and I'm not aware, it will grow back. It will come back. And that's kind of like what it, like I'm heavy into meditation these days, and it's about quieting that voice, or kind of like going, the voice is going to keep doing the voice, but you don't have to listen to the voice. You don't have to, you don't have to identify with it as much anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And kind of how I see it now. Yeah.
And how did so when you entered the program and you start working the steps, like, cause I have some Just in my own work, I'm thinking about how there's that real resistance to that, and I can feel that in your own story. I think that's really important to get into. And then, so you don't take the steps, and you are told that you won't live for a year, but then you do live for over a year. Then you get to this next stage where you have to call your friend. Well, you call your friend asking for a gun, so you get into full suicidal ideation, and then you just say, okay. And something clicks and you go through the steps. And so that switch is really interesting to me, and also what AA kind of offered you as a salvation, I suppose, or a redemption, or a pathway, or even a new storyline that is different than the one that you've been living, which is kind of, I don't know, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and ultimately a marriage to death, because it feels like you're about to die all of the time in this story. You're just right close to that edge. And then it offers you something else, something you rejected earlier, but for some reason you want to go there now. What did it tell me? Give me an insight into what it did offer you personally in your subjective experience, and how it offered you that lifeline and why you took it.
Well, I can tell you that literally nobody else was trying to help me. There was no one else trying to help, right? And the vibe is, it's not like, hey, Brice, we love you, and we're going to do this for you. It's like, Brice, we love you, and we don't want you to die from alcoholism, but you have to do the work yourself.
Yeah.
And recovery is work. And the book is laid out in a certain way, and there's a certain order to things. And if you go through the process, there's different experiences along the way. And at some point, I didn't want to drink anymore. And to me, that was magic. I had to work to get to that part, and it has not come back in 11 years. And I didn't think that would happen. But I had to, I had to surrender. I had to surrender my opinion. I had to surrender my judgment. I had to surrender my will. I had to be willing to go to meetings. I had to get a sponsor. Every time I had what I thought was a great idea, I had to run it by him first. And often he would say, that is a terrible idea. What do you expect to get? What are you expecting from that? Right.
Right.
And then you get to a certain part in the steps, and you do an inventory of yourself, of your life, and you get to write it all down. These are the reasons why I am the way I am. And it kind of feels good, because you get to complain about everything that ever happened to you. But then, the sponsor who's been through the steps points out where you're wrong, or where I got the ball rolling and kept it going in the wrong direction. And there was a lot of victimhood in my story. And he says, why are you always the victim in these stories? And then he says, these are your character defects. These are the things that are blocking you from God, and they're keeping you from a happy life. And so that process is difficult. And I also went to treatment. I went to rehab for 2 years, because I was so scared to drink again. I believed that if I drank again, I would die. I didn't think I had another chance at salvation. And so I stay with the process. And there's another part in the steps where you make an amends to people that you have wronged. And I did my best. And it was some of my first early conversations with my family, and they went great. And so what happens is I'm living a certain way, and I act and react to life in certain ways. And then when I get to this part in the steps, I realize I do not have to act and react to life the ways that I have been, because I have new tools. And there's a power in my life that I can feel now. And then you get to the part where you make amends, and it's like, I don't have to defend, justify, or explain myself any longer. And I feel like my own man, and I'm sober, and God forbid, happy. And my whole life is open. It's like my whole life is ahead of me. I can be the man I want to be. I can be the father I want to be. I can be the son I want to be. And I have more of a choice. And I did it by doing what they said to do. The people that wanted to help me originally. And so that's been my experience. And unfortunately, the ego grows back, right? It's got a own little thing. And so I put my hands back on my life, and I make massive mistakes in sobriety.
Okay.
Massive mistakes, right?
Mm. And what kind of mistakes did you make in sobriety?
Well, I got in a relationship early on, and I definitely wasn't ready for that. I didn't understand these things. I didn't understand why these women all treated me a certain way, and it's because I kept choosing a certain kind of woman.
Mm.
And then I would be mad at them for not being able to, do the things I wanted, or treat me the way I felt I needed to be treated. And it's because I had more healing to do. So around 2 years sober, I was massively depressed and just like really, really suicidal again. And I had never been depressed and sober. So that was a new experience for me. And I remember talking to a guy, an old timer, and I told him I'm depressed. Sometimes I don't want to wake up. And he said, well, are you meditating? And I said, I'm not that depressed. Right. I, I heard myself say it, and he was like laughing at me. He said, you got to start meditating, dude. You got to like start working the program. And so I was in therapy as well. And, I went through a whole year of like just real deep healing and working on my, you know, early childhood wounds and family of origin stuff, and recommitted to the program. And that's when I kind of like that's when I became deeply spiritual, because up to that point, I really kind of neatly evaded the whole idea of God. But when I was that depressed, and nothing that had ever worked for me was working anymore. And
Mm.
I just had this real feeling like God is everything or God is nothing. And I watched that movie, The Secret,
Oh, yeah.
and I was like, that's cool. And I got really into it, like the law of attraction and Joe Dispenza and all these kinds of people, Wayne Dyer and all this stuff. And I just was like on this whole new journey. And
Mm.
and then so the therapist that I've been working with said, "What is your purpose?" And I said, "Well, I'm a realtor." At the time, I was a realtor. I said, "She said, no. What's your purpose? Who are you as a sober man?
Mm.
What are you going to do with your life? What lights you up? Who do you love? Who loves you?" And I had never asked those questions, right? And so I had gotten in my head that I had accumulated all this stuff and it wasn't making me happy, and I needed to get rid of it all. So I gave away a whole bunch of furniture, a bunch of musical equipment, and I sold the house that I was living in because I didn't really like it. It wasn't my dream house. And
Mm.
I moved to a small apartment in the city, started meditating hardcore, and looking for my purpose, right? And through this odd series of events, um, well, I'll tell you, I was watching this documentary called Bob and the Monster. It's Bob Forrest. He's an addiction therapist, and he was on Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew. And he was part of a program called Music Cares. And he got John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers into rehab. And I was like, that is cool.
Wow.
I was a musician. I could do that. So
Yeah.
I went to a Music Cares meeting, and I stayed afterwards, and I asked the guy, what can I do? How can I help? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to do something to give back. And he said, we need sober housing. And I didn't really even know what it was. But I knew something in me said, I knew I was going to do it. And so I called a friend of mine who'd been sober like 20 years and told him of my idea to do sober housing. He lives in Minnesota, and he says, my best friend up here owns St. Paul Sober Living. They got like 15 sober houses. Come up. I'll show you the whole thing. So I went up, just following the threads, right? And learned about it. I learned about sober housing, and I just saw this huge community of people all helping each other, and all these houses and all these people, and all doing recovery. And I was just blown away. And so I moved back. I came back to Denver, and I opened a house with my father's help. We bought a house, and I opened a sober house in Denver, and my depression lifted, and I was having a blast because I was giving back and I was being of service, and I didn't know it would be a career. And so one house turned into two, turned into three, turned into nine.
Wow.
Now I have a staff, and it all from just kind of like seeking, you know what I mean? Honestly seeking. and I ended up with a new career. And at one point, the city of Denver said, "You can't do this anymore. We don't have the zoning for sober houses." And so I lawyered up, and I was fighting the city of Denver. And the same
Wow.
friend that taught me about sober housing said, "Why don't you open a treatment center?" Again, I have no idea what that means or how to do that. I'm not a therapist, but I get it in my head that I'm going to do it. And so I did it. I found some space. I convinced a guy to be my clinical director. He was a licensed therapist. And then I hired more people and just continued. I continued to add services. And today we're a residential treatment center with all levels of outpatient care. And right now we have 6 supportive sober houses.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so this is how Mile High Recovery Center sort of forms itself then.
Yeah. And
so,
it was like, no grand vision, just one thing. Like, I'm searching for my purpose to heal myself.
yeah. And it's interesting that lifts the depression, that lifts because even, I think this is such an important component of the journey, isn't it, to actually find purpose, to find some way to put it, because otherwise it's still a bit of navel gazing, or it's still kind of like, the project is still about the self, right? And it needs to be about the self for a certain amount of time, but then that switch, which is a sort of sacred part of the journey, I think, where that switch comes to, rather than, well, how can I help myself even more, to that magical component of switching it around to helping others.
Yeah.
And then there's this flow of, like it feels good. Just as simple as that. It feels good to do that.
It feels amazing, and it is its own reward, right? Being able to give back what was freely given to me. And like I said, I'm not a therapist, so it was like my mission was to set it up and just hope that people find magic the way that I had found magic. And some do, and some don't.
Yeah, of course. You can't. Yeah. But are you hands-on in your business though? Are you also there with the addicts and working with people?
No, I'm there. I'm there every day, but I'm not in with the addicts. I did go to a sober house meeting on Sunday, and so I'm still there. And my presence is felt, but the way managed care is set up, it's different than when it's not AA, right? It's different. Like managed care is set up so that you bill people's insurance and you got to do certain things, but you can add your own flavor. And, my flavor's in there, and Mile High has a certain reputation for being, heavy in 12-step, and we talk spirituality and mindfulness and connection and community. And that's just kind of our jam. Like, and that came from my original need to heal myself. And when the question was, who do I love? I love alcoholics and addicts. I think they're hilarious. And, and I understand it. I understand that, that feeling like you're not connected, or that spiritual hunger, or that hole in your soul. And, so I speak the language, and I walk the walk, and I'm there. Most of my people are also in recovery. And so we're working shoulder to shoulder, helping others, but I don't run groups.
No,
I don't have the qualifications.
Yeah. So you're just around, which is maybe enough. Yeah, doing your own journey and setting things up and putting in obviously a lot of infrastructure and different things that you do. So you bring this particular skill set that you have as obviously a visionary and an entrepreneur and somebody that can make things happen, because all the way through your life, even when you were booking shows and running and having your band and doing the music and everything, you had a lot of that drive in you. So there's something in your character and your nature that does that. And then you just directed it the right way, I suppose.
Yeah. And isn't every entrepreneur's isn't the real goal to set up something that's successful, and now you're a CEO, and the numbers are so big that you can't manage it all on your own, right? You need to rely on other people. And so that's where it is today. It's like the numbers are scary sometimes, and that's kind of my job, is to, deal with that.
The numbers, meaning the financial numbers or the numbers of
The
people or
financial numbers, the payroll, and it's important. People's lives are at stake. People can die. People can overdose. These people have real problems, and there's an immediate need to help them with these problems. A lot of mental health issues, and not just addiction.
And you're having to come up with up against and with a system in the United States that is obviously, there's the big legal components to everything that happens there. As you said, the insurance, and then the healthcare or lack of, or all these different things, the price of healthcare, all those kinds of things. And you're trying to help people that are down and out. By definition, they're not doing great.
They're not
in that system, and you have to find ways. I'm sure you have to find so many ways to work from within that system. Probably its own challenge, yeah.
And it feels like the healthcare system is broken in some ways. Fortunately, it's not really my job to figure that part out.
No, it's not.
I'm just doing my thing, and like I said, I set it up, and I hope that they find magic. And every person that gets better has a family, and so there's a ripple effect that
of course,
that goes on for every person that you help. We've probably helped hundreds, maybe thousands of people at this point. And the ripple effect of that is even bigger. But the problem is massive. There's an epidemic of drugs.
Yeah.
Fentanyl and crystal meth.
Yeah, you're getting more of that fentanyl stuff recently. Yeah.
We're right downtown. I look out my office window and I see addicts on the street, homeless people on the street.
It's a big problem, isn't it? And it just seems to be getting bigger.
Yeah. And like when I was a kid, I had every reasonable expectation I could snort some cocaine and not overdose and die. And kids on the party scene now, they don't have that safety. People are dying from fentanyl that are not even addicts. They're just kids experimenting, and it's a problem.
Yeah, major problem. Just to come back to the so one of the places I'm really interested in is the more Jungian side of psychology, which Jung wrote a letter to Bill W., the AA guy. I'm sure you know about that. And this spiritus contra spiritum, the idea that the spirit we're reaching for, if we can reach through that to the thing we're really, really grasping for, then the whole thing changes around. And this kind of play on words of the spirit that's in the bottle there, and the spirit that is our eternal nature. The two are getting confused by the addict. And so Jung's idea that when we reach for that bottle, we're not really reaching for the bottle, we're reaching for something though. And is that something that you kind of get a sense of like what you personally were reaching for when you were reaching for the bottle?
Well, yeah, we talk a lot about the bondage of self in AA, relieve me of the bondage of self. And it's kind of the belief that I can solve my own problems and that I know better. And there's, like I said before, there's like a hole that alcoholics feel. They're trying to fill it. Yeah. And what they really need is, what AA would say is they need God. They need a higher power in their life. They don't need more alcohol.
No.
And Jung knew that, and he knew that, prior to AA, alcoholics would just die. There wasn't really there was no treatment centers. There was no cure. There was no help. But he knew that people could have vital spiritual experiences and get better. The question is, how do you help somebody have a vital spiritual experience? And it's difficult. But yeah, Jung knew that, and he was a fairly spiritual fellow himself.
Yeah, he dedicated himself to his soul, I think. And that's what I'm really fascinated with. But if you're reaching for, I think, my sense in your story is that you were reaching for relief from that empty, soulless, feelingless space that was haunting you, that seems to me that in your upbringing, the absence of feeling was something that really went against your nature as someone who's probably quite a feeling type, as well as many other things that obviously quite, that, you know, your intellect and your visionary, but obviously you're a feeler, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you're cut off from feeling. And so I wonder if, you know, because I think as somebody that's kind of like gone back through, this is me I'm talking about, I've gone back through the all-powerful God, that one, doesn't really have the same energy to me anymore, but the old gods do, and they're all specific. So we all have sort of our deities. You know, in ancient Greece, you'd have the cult of Asclepius; those would be your healers. That you'd have the cult of Aphrodite; those would be your more sensual kind of folk. The cult of Dionysus, you know, ones that are taken into the wild ecstasy of being one with nature again, and this kind of sense that our souls all have a specific thing that they're trying to do, you know, and it's different than other people. This is why I think that they're sort of like separating out of the different gods again helps, at least for me, to get a sense of like, who am I on the God level, as far as like which God is my God, you know, not to confuse me with that God, but to create relationship with something a bit more specific. I think that might have been where Jung was getting at to an extent of because it's interesting how different people will have different addictions to different substances and for different reasons. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about that, of, you know, if we think along those terms again, because the different substances, as you said, you would have got into whatever, but it sounds like alcohol was the main one.
Yeah, that was my first and last love, was alcohol.
First and last love. You know, and if we take away all of the horrible things of it, like, who is that love? What is that love? What was that torrid love affair?
Yeah.
Who's behind it?
Yeah, I don't know. It gave me courage. It gave me strength. It made me think that I was powerful. It gave me it made me feel powerful. And it worked great at first. You know, it was a party. I was the life of the party. And prior to that, I was a scared, shy, sensitive, creative little boy. And then add alcohol, and it's like, no, I am like rocking, man. I'm a rocking guitar player and a hard drinking guy, and I'm chasing women. And but then after 2.5 decades of that, alcohol had turned on me and the party was over, right? And I had like a reverse tolerance. I would black out faster. I was passing blood. I was waking up with the shakes. I would have to drink vodka before I could drink water. It had replaced all basic needs. Like food came after I'd get my daily drink. In the morning, 6 a.m., I'd have to drink. And
wow.
So then it was like, you know, now what, right? And then you take the alcohol out and I feel worse.
Yeah.
I feel better.
I guess the god that I hear behind that is maybe like Poseidon, the ocean god, that element of being able to create a scene and create feeling in the atmosphere, because that's what music does as well. Be the life of the party, have the courage, have the strength, and have that kind of like force of nature that you were bringing through. And then once you realize that the thing that was getting you there was killing you, okay, that all falls apart. But maybe as you move through and through your recovery, you're also, I mean, you're doing that again, but on a different level, on a different octave, on a different frequency. It's kind of like the Dumbo's feather thing, right? I think about, you know, Dumbo thinks he can fly because of that feather. And then when he drops the feather, he realizes, oh shit, I can still fly. And I think there's an importance here. And this is what I try to get to with people I'm working with who are going through this process. You know, I once saw a guy, I was at a festival in Australia, and he was a former heroin addict. And he said, you can't, for some people at least, you can't convince them to get sober if they can't still get to the magical place. So for him, it's like heroin got him to a magical place. And if you're telling him like, you have to never go there again and be sober, he's going to say no. So what he needs to know is that he needs to be able to get to the magical place without Dumbo's feather, right? Without without the thing that's going to kill him. And so for him, I remember that speech. It was, 20 years ago that I was there for that, kind of like in that festival. But I liked the idea that he was getting to. He ended up coming at it from qigong and qi work, and herbs, acupuncture, these kinds of things. That was his way. And so he's like, you got to fix up the body first. But then the main promise from this path is that actually, like all the sages and, the Taoist masters and things, they're living in that place. Or you think about the Ram Dass story, where the guy is saying, he's got all this LSD, right? And the monk takes like 40 tabs of LSD, and Ram Dass is panicking with his guys, like he's going to die. There's no way to survive that much LSD. Like but the guy didn't change his state at all, right? Because ultimately, actually, he's already living in that consciousness. And so I think that's the other thing where there is a consciousness available through these substances that will kill you because you're accessing it without any preparation for it. And maybe that's an element of what's going to kill you there. And also the substance itself is clearly a poison. But the state of consciousness, now that's a different thing.
Yeah, you got to work for it, but it's just like the goal is like to be comfortable in my own skin. And with the alcohol and the drugs, it was not authentic. I was never really authentically comfortable in my own skin. And so you take it away, and you got to ask. For myself, I had to like ask that little boy in me, what does he need to heal? What does he need to feel, better? And then it didn't happen all at once. Like I said, I had to work for the experience. But then there was a day that I woke up and I realized I hadn't thought about drinking for a couple of weeks. And prior to that, I was either drinking, recovering from drinking, thinking about drinking, or thinking about not drinking. And I woke up and I realized I haven't thought about drinking at all for like 2 weeks. And it was like, for me, it was like, I think I can do this, right? Like, and it's scary when you tell somebody you can never do that again. Ever? Never. Not even a sip? Nope.
Wow.
Right? And it's then that's why you have terms like one day at a time, right?
Yeah.
And I can do one day at a time.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, you found, or, as a question, but also a statement, I suppose, that you've found that confidence, and you've seemed to have found that esteem, and that, like soothed also the self-hate, and come to a different state of consciousness now, would you say, through this work?
Yeah. I have gratitude for my life, and I have like peak emotional experiences, like through watching my kids and just being with my kids. And that was not something that ever appealed to me. And I'd like to say I got sober for my kids, but that's not why I did it. Plenty of people abandon their kids for addictions. And, but today it's like, it's different, right? Like I don't have highs and lows and like craziness and chaos, but I have peace and serenity, and I have the ability to, be who I want to be and do what I want to do and feel good about my decisions and be sober minded and be able to execute when I need to. And it's a different vibe. And I believe that's what most people call life.
Yeah.
And sure, like there's always another level for me. Like there's always more to let go of and more to discover. And like I like that process. Like I spent 2.5 decades of my life, and I lost them to the disease of addiction. And they were wasted days in many ways. But now I don't have to do that, and I'm trying to fight back as many days as I can. And life, it can be beautiful, right? And so that's kind of my goal, and that's just the headspace I try to be in these days.
I guess it is your path as well, right? Like that's an interesting thing to look at, that
Sure.
the path involved that addiction, and that's what you give your life to now. So it's an interesting one where it is what you're dedicated to, just on the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I said before, I walk the walk. I've been where they are, and I have a bird's eye view, and I know that their life is about to get amazing if they just do certain things and stay the course. And like that fella on heroin, you don't get that overnight. You have to work, and it takes time, but you will get there, right?
And I think that's his point. He was saying, he's not trying to get everybody back to this regular state of consciousness. He's trying to get you back to the experience of like, actually, there is bliss available in this life. But if you take the shortcuts, they'll kill you, those shortcuts. But here's some ways to get there that are actually kind of sustainable and still give you like the Pegasus, your 4 feet are on the ground, but you still have the wings. And I think that's kind of like one of these images that, because I think for a lot of people, it's like, I don't want to be sober because sober is boring and dull.
Maybe, yeah. And that's how I felt too. Why should I deprive myself of things that I like? Well, because it's killing me. So yeah, I mean, that's like, I tried, like, what do they say? Like, you got to, where your wound is, like where your wound is where your path is going to go. And that's what I know. I know alcoholism. I know addiction. I know bad choices and bad decisions and mental health problems. And so those are the people that I'm trying to help.
Yeah. Like Michael Mead said, the wound is the womb. It's his little trick on that one, which I like. Well, this is awesome, Brice. Thank you. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you would, because people might be listening to this that are going through several phases of the process you've been in, and you really sound like you've been through, the whole gamut, run the gauntlet of it. And is there anything that you'd sort of give as from your personal experience and also the working with the people you work with, anything that you can imagine would be a message for them that as we wrap up?
I remember when I first started, and I was just like a month in and 2 months in and 3 months in, people, the more sober people, the old timers would say it gets better. And I got so sick of hearing that because I felt awful, and it did get better. And it was kind of like, I just didn't think it would ever get better, but I was like struggling and working. And then it did get better. And recovery is work. I do not regret any of it. It's worth it.
Yeah.
But it's hard at first. It is difficult.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that and for your reflections and for sharing of your journey, which is a fascinating journey. It was really great to meet with you today, and thanks again.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.